Hey students, welcome to Unit 5.2, Environmental Influences on the Individual. Last Unit 5.1 we focused on genetics and how genetics contribute to human behavior and personality. Well, today we're going to be focusing on the environment and how nurturing impacts who we are and who we become. So last unit we talked about how genes is anything but the environment. So what is the environment? The environment is any influence other than genetics on an individual's behavior. So this can include the culture someone is raised in, your family and your family values and how your parents raised you in those values, the socioeconomic group that you're in, the ethnic group that you're in, the culture that you're in. These are all environmental factors. Nutrition, what you eat, what you take into your body from your environment is also environmental factors. So it's important to note that environment does matter, and that's going to be highlighted in early learning and brain development. So early brain development, early experience is critical in brain development. All right, the more experience you have as an infant, toddler, prepubescent, pre-adolescent, all the way into adolescence and adulthood, the more experiences you have, the more neural networks you develop in your brain. And the more neural networks you develop in your brain, the better. All right, the faster you are at processing information, the more higher level critical thinking you're able to do. All right, so the more experiences you have as a child, the more neural networks you develop. And this is one of the negative things facing the elderly people. If you stop using certain neural connections, they'll begin to atrophy and dwindle away. So in later life, continued use is necessary to maintain these neural connections in the brain. Okay? So here that is explained in graphics. So the more a child is experienced in life, the more neural networks they will develop. All right. So here we see a child's neural networks at birth. Here's a child's neural networks at 3 months of age. Here's a child's neural networks at 15 months. And a child's neural networks at 2 years. So you can see that there is rapid neurological development happening in the early first 5-8 years of life for every human being. So the more neural networks you develop earlier on in life, the better prepared you are for adulthood and all the mental rigorous demands that it entails. Well, how do peers and parents influence who we are and who we become? Peer influences, especially when you are a teenager and adolescents, are very, very powerful influences. In fact, when you're a teenager and younger, your peers are actually more influential on you than your own parents, especially when it comes to short-term goals and short-term desires. So, for example, if you need to know what clothes to wear to be cool, or what music you want to listen to, or what you do tonight, you're going to be typically more influenced by your peers. However, when it comes to long-term goals, like what your career should be or what school you want to go to, you have a tendency to listen to your parents more or be more influenced by your parents. Okay, many studies suggest a peer group is correlated with school performance, smoking, drug use, and other behaviors. So it's really important to be aware of the group of friends you hang out with. If you hang out with a group of friends who are the slackers and don't succeed in academics and don't care about school, you might start finding yourself slipping into that same attitude, that same mindset. So if that describes you, you need to start hanging out with more of the intellectuals in your class so you can start to develop more advantageous habits. When it comes to short-term wants and needs, teens are much more likely to be influenced by their peers, whereas in long-term needs, they're much more likely to be influenced by their parents, as we said earlier. Environmental matters. What about cultural influences? So culture are shared attitudes, beliefs, norms, and behaviors of a group. Culture is communicated from one generation to the next. This is how cultural norms perpetuate themselves. All right, so we have cultural norms. Norms are accepted behaviors in a given culture. So like in the Western culture, it's the norm to shake people's hands or to say yes, sir, and no, sir. Taboo are behaviors that are unacceptable in a given culture. All right, so to walk up to a teacher and then call a teacher a cuss word would be very, very taboo. Or to walk around or to come to school with a bunch of face piercings would also be taboo because it's not normal. It's not seen very often. It's not socially desirable or acceptable typically. Now remember, there are two different main types of cultures. There's the collectivistic culture, which is more interdependent, like the Eastern cultures like Japan, China, so forth. And then there's individualistic cultures, which opens itself to more competition, which is found in Western societies like the United States, Canada, Britain. All right, remember, collectivistic cultures are cooperative, individualistic cultures are competitive. Personal space, this refers to the bubble. Has anyone ever been inside your bubble or violated your personal space? All right, this has cultural roots as well. In the West, especially in the United States, we don't like people to get too close to us. Maybe it's a germ phobia or something, but we just don't like people to stand too close. Whereas in Europe or in Asia, for example, people tend to stand very, very close to one another. All right, so again, norms are understood rules for accepted and expected behavior. It consists of the proper behavior within a group. Norms enable us, cultural norms inform us as to how to appropriately act, how to appropriately behave in a given culture. This comes in handy, especially if you're going to travel overseas. It's a great way to learn the norms so you can make friends and not offend anybody when traveling abroad. Individualism, which is found in individualistic cultures, is giving priority to one's goal over the goals of the group. It's defining one's identity in terms of personal attributes rather than the group's identification. It tends to see people as separate and independent, which has a greater propensity towards competition. All right. Now, defining one's identity in terms of personal attributions rather than group identification. This can be any group, like cultural group, national group, state group, municipality, whatever. And collectivism is more characteristic of collectivistic cultures, where it gives priority to the goals of one's group over one's personal goals, defining one's identity in terms of the group's identification rather than personal attributes. It sees people as connected to others as opposed to being autonomous individual beings. And then individual needs are sacrificed for the good of the group. Gender is the shaping of gender illustrates the effects of nature versus nurture. Genes and hormones define gender as well as our environmental and our culture. So for example, who plays with Barbies, boys or girls? Well, typically it's Barbies. Who wears skirts and dresses, boys or girls? It's typically girls. Who goes out and plays football? It's typically boys. Why is that? Well, not only is that the cultural norms, but there's also genetic underlyings. Boys have testosterone, which facilitates larger muscle definition, larger muscle tone. It leads to more aggressive behavior. So, therefore, boys are genetically more predisposed to play sports like football. And also in review, your sex is determined by your 23 paired chromosomes. The pair that came from your mother was an X chromosome. The pair that came from your father is a Y, and is either an X chromosome if it's a girl or a Y if it's a boy. Okay, which means you have 46 chromosomes that contribute to your genome. Environmental factors, nurturing, that contributes to who we are and what we become. The social learning theory. This is a big one, all right? This is where we learn social behaviors by observing and mimicking or imitating and by being rewarded or punished. All right, so what we do is we observe a behavior. Let's say we observe our dad coming home and asking our mom if she had a nice day. And the mom says, yes, I did. And then they have a nice little kiss or whatever, and they have a fun little cordial conversation. And then you have a fun family meal and all that good stuff. Well, you begin to think about that interaction between your parents, and you're thinking, man, that led to a really positive social interaction. So when you become an adult, that's how you're going to greet your spouse in the future, and you're going to have a very positive relationship because of that. However, conversely, social learning theory has been responsible for the perpetuation of prejudices and stereotypes in the past. And you might have remembered an example from class. So if you think of it, remind me, and we'll talk in class. The last four concepts we'll discuss are pretty big ones, so you need to take special note. Environmental factors, gender roles. Gender roles are expected behaviors for males and females. So males are supposed to be the dominant masculine figures, whereas females more historically have been the feminine caregivers, providers, that kind of thing. All right, so as we can see, the gender roles are starting to change a little bit. Women are becoming more and more involved in the workforce, taking on more and more professional responsibilities. Now, if a man was to stay at home with the kids and be a stay-at-home dad, this would be considered a little bit more taboo. However, I don't know if that's still the case. What do you guys think? We'll discuss in class. Another concept is gender typing. Gender typing is how we acquire our gender roles. It's the acquisition of traditional masculine or feminine roles. So if I'm 5 years old and I'm playing with a Barbie, and my brother walks in and sees me playing with a Barbie and then beats me up for it and says, "Hey, you're being a little sissy. Stop playing with that Barbie. Go out and throw the football around." That is a form of gender typing, which reinforces the gender roles that society instills on us, that our culture and our environment instills on us. Gender roles are not defined by our genes. Gender roles are defined by our society. Gender typing is how our society or our environment reinforces and facilitates those gender roles. Gender identity is your own sense of being male or female. It's how you see yourself. Okay, so you might be a female, but you might be more tomboyish. You like playing sports, and you like being outdoors, kind of like my wife does. And if you're a male, you might be more into, I don't know, dance, drama, theater, and there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. It's how you identify yourself. All right. And then last but not least is the gender schema theory, which kind of combines the social learning theory with some other of these concepts that we've discussed. The gender schema theory is where children learn from their culture a concept of what it means to be a male and a female, and that they adjust their behavior accordingly. So if I see on television that someone is being made fun of because they don't fit a certain gender role, then I might try to modify my behavior to fit that gender role so that I can be rewarded in the future. Okay? We will go over these in more detail in class. See you guys later.